The 1971 Formula One season featured the 22nd World Championship of Drivers, the 14th International Cup for F1 manufacturers, and a number of non-championship races open to Formula One cars. The World Championship was contested over 11 races between the 6th of March and the 3rd of October. Jackie Stewart, driving for Tyrrell Racing, won his second Drivers' Championship. Tyrrell won their first and only Manufacturers' Cup. Their car was powered by the famous Cosworth DFV V8, while rivals BRM and Ferrari made use of self-designed V12 engines. 1970 champions Team Lotus had a desultory season after the death of their driver and champion Jochen Rindt, experimenting with a gas turbine engine and four-wheel drive, but ending up just 5th in the standings. Two Formula One drivers lost their lives this year while racing. Pedro Rodríguez crashed his Ferrari 512 in July, at an Interserie race at the Norisring, and Jo Siffert died in October, in a fiery crash during the victory race at Brands Hatch. This was the first season where at least 22 cars started every championship race, except the Monaco Grand Prix, where 18 cars started. In this season, the Spanish Grand Prix was moved from Jarama to Montjuic, in keeping with the event-sharing arrangement between the two circuits. Likewise, the British Grand Prix was moved from Brands Hatch to Silverstone, and the Canadian Grand Prix was moved from Mont-Tremblant to Moseport Park. The French Grand Prix was moved from Charade Circuit to the newly built Paul Ricard Circuit. The German Grand Prix returned to the Nürburgring for 1971 after major safety changes had been made to the circuit. It had been moved to the Hockenheimring in 1970 after drivers refused to race at the Nürburgring in the condition it was in. There was many driver changes in this season. While Lotus and Tyrrell had kept their lineup from 1970, quite a lot of changes happened further down the field. Ferrari signed Mario Andretti next to their 1970 drivers Jackie Ickx and Clay Regazzoni. March arrived with a brand new lineup of Ronnie Peterson, who previously drove a privately entered March, Alex Solaroig, for his first full-time drive, and Andrea De Adami. The Italian drove an Alfa Romeo-powered McLaren in 1970 and moved, together with the Alfa Romeo project, to the March team for this year. Peterson and Solaroig, meanwhile, kept using the Cosworth DFV engines. Jo Siffert moved from March to BRM, next to regular driver Pedro Rodríguez and debutant Howden Ganley. Jack Brabham retired from racing and he hired two-time champion Graham Hill to drive for his team. In the second entry, Tim Schenken was hired instead of Rolf Stomlin, who moved to Surtees. Schenken had previously driven for Frank Williams' team, but they attracted Henri Pescarolo from Matra. Williams also switched from a De Tomaso chassis to a March. During his season, Andrea De Adami shared the drive of the March Alfa Romeo with fellow Italian Nanni Golli. Golli also took the place of Alex Solaroig when the Spaniard quit the team. At the Austrian Grand Prix, future champion Niki Lauda made his debut. Lotus experimented with a four-wheel drive gas turbine-powered car, the 56B. Although the engine did not deliver concrete success, the excellent chassis and wedge-shaped bodywork would serve as an inspiration to multiple championship-winning teams in the years to come. Unfortunately, on the 11th of July, Pedro Rodríguez was killed at the Norisring in Nuremberg, West Germany, driving a Ferrari 512M in an Interserie sports car race. He was fourth in the Formula One championship at the time. Ahead of the Austrian Grand Prix, Peter Gethin moved from McLaren to BRM. His seat was filled by Jackie Oliver and then Mark Donoghue. It seemed a successful move for Gethin as, just a month later, he won the Italian Grand Prix with the highest average speed in Formula One history. It would, however, turn out to be his only podium finish and, ironically, he would never even lead a lap, having jumped from fourth to first in the final lap of that race at Monza. But let's go now to discover the 11 races of this new epic Formula One World Championship 1971. The South African Grand Prix, held at the fast and flowing high-altitude Kilami circuit between Johannesburg and Pretoria in March, kicked off the championship season. Stewart took pole, ahead of the 12-cylinder cars of Amon, Regazzoni, and Andretti. At the start, Regazzoni took the lead going into the Crowthorne corner ahead of Fittipaldi. Ickx, who had started 8th, Hume, Rodríguez, Andretti, and Stewart. Amon dropped to 14th, Hume in his McLaren Ford passed Fittipaldi for second, then Regazzoni for the lead. Hume led the race until the 76th of 79 laps, when he had to come into the pits to repair some suspension damage his car had suffered. Andretti took the lead and won, followed by Stewart, Regazzoni, Weisel, Amon, and Hume. The Spanish Grand Prix in 1971 was held at the Montjuic Park City Street Circuit in Barcelona. The previous year it had been held at the Circuito del Jarama near Madrid as part of a rotation with the Catalan circuit. The Ferraris of Ickx and Regazzoni were 1–2 on the grid respectively, followed by Amon, Stewart, Rodríguez, Beltoise, Githin, and Andretti. 6 of the first 8 cars had 12-cylinder engines. Stewart took second place at the start, and passed Ickx for the lead on lap 6. Amon overtook Regazzoni for third place on lap 3. Stewart began to increase his lead over Ickx while Amon ran third. Regazzoni went out on lap 13 with a fuel pump failure, which promoted Rodríguez to fourth place with Andretti fifth and Denny Hume sixth in his McLaren Ford. In the mid-race Andretti retired with an engine problem, and so Hume moved to fifth place and Beltoise took sixth. In the closing lap, Ickx closed the gap to Stewart, but he was still 3.4 seconds behind at the finish, ahead of Amon. 5 weeks after the second round in Spain came the most prestigious round of the calendar, the Monaco Grand Prix, which was also the 200th World Championship Grand Prix. Qualifying was run in rainy conditions, and Stewart took pole by 1.2 seconds from Jackie Ickx's Ferrari. The second row featured Siffert's BRM and Amon's Matra. Then it was Rodríguez, Hume, Beltoise, Ronnie Peterson in a March, Hill and John Surtees in a car of his own construction. Team Lotus were far down with Weisel 11th and Fittipaldi 17th. Amon had problems at the start and lost half a lap, so Ickx and Stewart were left to fight for the first corner with Siffert, who managed to slip ahead of the Ferrari and take second place behind Stewart. 5-time Monaco Grand Prix winner Graham Hill made a mistake and crashed on the second lap, and his Brabham teammate Tim Schenken hit a barrier 2 laps later while swerving to avoid Francois Severt's Tyrrell Ford when the car's engine cut. Both men got going again, but Severt crashed 2 laps later when the DFV engine cut again. Stewart gradually increased his lead, while Peterson climbed up to second place in the mid-race, passing both Ickx and Siffert. Stewart was able to hold on to take victory ahead of Peterson and Ickx. Siffert later went out with an engine failure, so fourth place went to Hume. For weeks after Monaco was the Dutch Grand Prix, held at the very fast and dangerous Zandvoort circuit, west of Amsterdam. The bumpy circuit had few safety features. Ickx took pole, ahead of Rodríguez, Stewart, Regazzoni, and Amon. The race was run in wet conditions, and at the start Mario Andretti's Ferrari was missing because of a fuel pump problem. He did start the race but was a long way behind and retired after just a few laps. Ickx went ahead of Rodríguez, Stewart, and Amon. Siffert blew his chances with a spin. On the second lap Amon spun out, and on the third lap Stewart had a rare spin and dropped to 8th place. The Goodyear shod runners were suffering compared to the Firestone shod cars. This left Regazzoni third and Surtees fourth ahead of Weisel. The Swede did not last long because a rear wheel worked loose, and trying to solve the problem he reversed into the pit lane and was disqualified. As everyone else struggled, Ickx and Rodríguez built up a big lead, with Rodríguez moving ahead on the 9th lap. They ran closely for a number of laps, but towards the end Ickx pulled away to win by nearly 8 seconds. Regazzoni finished third. The Dutch Grand Prix was not held in 1972 due to the outdated facilities of the circuit. It returned for 1973. 2 weeks after the Dutch race was the French Grand Prix at the brand new Paul Ricard circuit near Marseille in the south of France. This circuit, in stark comparison to the rudimentary facilities of Zandvoort, was one of the most modern racing circuits in the world, with a smooth surface and state-of-the-art facilities not seen before in Formula One. It also had a long 1.1-mile straight, typical of French circuits. In the 2 previous years, the event had held at the Twisty Charade public road circuit near Clermont-Ferrand. This was a very different type of circuit to Paul Ricard. Stewart took pole ahead of Regazzoni, Ickx and Graham Hill in a Brabham. At the start Stewart went into the lead with Regazzoni chasing. Ickx was in trouble with his engine and dropped quickly back to retire while there was a battle for third place between Rodríguez and Beltoise. On the 19th lap, Peterson's Alfa Romeo engine blew up and Regazzoni spun off on the oil. Hill had a similar accident but was able to get going and pit for repairs. This left Rodríguez in second place. By then, Siffert had moved into third. Later, the ignition in Rodríguez's BRM failed. So Siffert found himself promoted to second place behind Stewart, giving Tyrrell a 1-2 finish. Third place went to Fittipaldi, who had come through the field after starting from 17th. 2 weeks after France was the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Before the race, Pedro Rodríguez had been killed in a crash while driving a Ferrari 512S sports car at a German Interserie race at the Norisring street circuit. At the start, Regazzoni and Ickx took the lead for Ferrari with Stewart third. At the tail of the field, Oliver ran into the back of Graham Hill's Brabham, putting both men out of the race. Stewart and Siffert overtook Ickx during the second lap, and on lap 4, Stewart overtook Regazzoni at Stowe Corner. He immediately began to build up a lead. Siffert overtook Regazzoni in the course of the 5th lap. Siffert began to suffer vibration problems and was caught and repassed by Regazzoni on lap 17. On lap 37, Ickx went into the pits to retire with engine trouble, and 5 laps later Siffert also retired with a misfire. This put Peterson up to third place with Schenken and Fittipaldi, who had dropped to 11th early on, chasing him. On lap 48, Regazzoni retired with engine trouble. With a few laps to go, Schenken suffered transmission failure and retired, leaving third place for Fittipaldi, and a home victory for Stewart, ahead of Peterson. Everyone else was lapped. The German Grand Prix returned to an updated 22.8 km Nürburgring after a year's absence from the track due to safety concerns. The circuit had been resurfaced and lined with Armco barrier, some of the worst bumps were taken out or smoothed over, and the circuit was made less twisty, and was therefore a little faster than before. But with the layout being largely unchanged, the circuit was still dangerous. Stewart took pole ahead of Ickx, Siffert and Regazzoni. The race distance was 12 laps, compared to the 14-lap distance for the 1969 race. There was a crowd of around 375,000 for the race on Sunday. Graham Hill, Brabham, and Rainer Wiesel, Lotus, both had problems before the start. Only 20 cars lined up on the grid. Ickx took the lead from Stewart, but the Tyrrell was soon back ahead again and pulling away from the rest, with Ickx being chased by Regazzoni, Hume, Siffert, Peterson and Siffert. On the second lap, while pushing hard to keep up with Stewart, Ickx spun off at the Icegove corner and Regazzoni went off as he tried to avoid his teammate. This left Stewart with a big lead over Siffert, who had overtaken Hume. Regazzoni rejoined in third and Peterson, who had also overtaken Hume, was fourth. The McLaren driver soon fell behind Andretti and Siffert, and the Tyrrell driver soon passed the Ferrari, so was up to fifth. In the laps that followed, Siffert overtook Peterson, Siffert, who soon dropped behind Regazzoni, and then Regazzoni himself. Thereafter the order remained stable at the front with a Tyrrell 1-2 the result, with Stewart winning his 5th race of the season. Regazzoni was third with Andretti catching and passing Peterson for 4th. For only the 3rd time, the Austrian Grand Prix was a championship round. The race was held at the Osterreichring in the rural Styrian mountains near Graz. Jackie Stewart had a large lead in the Drivers' Championship, 51 points compared to second place Jackie Ickx's 19 points and Ronnie Peterson's 16 points. If Ickx and Peterson both failed to score here, Stewart would be champion. Jo Siffert took pole in his BRM, followed by Stewart, Siffert, Regazzoni, Fittipaldi and Ickx. Siffert took the lead at the start and held off Stewart's attacks, with Regazzoni, Siffert, Ickx and Schenken chasing after them. Both Ferraris retired early with engine trouble. This promoted Siffert to 3rd place and Schenken to 4th. As the race progressed, Siffert closed on Stewart, who was struggling with the handling of his car. On lap 23, Siffert was waved through into 2nd place. On lap 31, Ickx had retired with problems with his Ferrari engine spark plugs, and Peterson was running in 9th place and out of the points with serious handling problems. On lap 36, Stewart's race ended with a broken rear axle. Siffert's engine failed on lap 43, promoting Fittipaldi to 2nd, having overtaken Schenken a few laps earlier. In the final lap, Siffert suffered a deflating tyre, but he was so far ahead that he was able to nurse the car to the line, beating Fittipaldi by just over 4 seconds. Peterson finished out of the points in 8th, so Stewart was world champion for the second time. Niki Lauda made his debut in this race in March. He qualified 21st and retired on lap 20 with handling problems. Peter Gethin won the 1971 Italian Grand Prix, his only World Championship Grand Prix victory. A year since the death of Jochen Rindt at Monza, there were still some legal problems between Team Lotus and the Italian authorities, which meant that Team Lotus did not officially enter the event, although a Lotus 56 did enter under the name Worldwide Racing. This car was powered by an American Pratt & Whitney turbine jet engine. McLaren was also down to just one entry as Denny Hulme was away in the United States for a USIC race in California. Matra was also running only one car as Jean-Pierre Beltoise was still suspended as a result of the sports car accident in January in Buenos Aires, which had killed Ignazio Giunti. The field was bolstered by a third Surtees, entered for Mike Hailwood, a multiple Grand Prix motorcycle champion making the transition to car racing. On the fast sweeps of Monza, the V12 cars were very competitive and Chris Amon took pole in his Matra with Jackie Ickx alongside in his Ferrari. The second row featured the BRMs of Jo Siffert and Howden Ganley, and the first V8 car was the Tyrrell of Francois Sevet, fifth on the grid. At the start of the race, Regazzoni made a fast start from the fourth row to take the lead. On lap 16 both Stewart and Ickx retired with engine failures, and 2 laps later Regazzoni went out as well. Eventually, a close 5-car battle developed for the lead, with Peter Gethin taking his only Grand Prix victory by 0.010 seconds. The first 5 cars were all covered by 0.61s. It was the closest finish in the history of the World Championship and the fastest ever race, with an average speed of 150.75 miles per hour. Peterson was second with Sevet third, Hailwood fourth and Ganley fifth. Amon was sixth over half a minute behind. Chicanes were added to Monza's layout for subsequent years, lowering average speeds and effectively eliminating the slipstream battles that highlighted previous Italian Grands Prix at Monza. 2 weeks after the Italian Grand Prix, the Canadian Grand Prix was held at Mosport Park Circuit near Toronto. World champion Stewart took pole position ahead of Siffert, Sevet, Fittipaldi, Amon, Peterson, Weisel, and Mark Donoghue in a Penske-entered McLaren. The Ferrari were not competitive with Ickx 12th, Andretti 13th and Regazzoni 18th. 37-year-old Wayne Kelly was killed on lap 2 of a Formula Ford support race and the Grand Prix was delayed, and by the time the race started it was pouring with rain. Howden Ganley crashed his BRM in the warm-up period before the race and so could not make the start. At the start, Stewart went into the lead with Peterson second, chased by Beltoise, Donoghue, Fittipaldi, Sevet and the rest. On the third lap, Graham Hill crashed his Brabham and 5 laps later Regazzoni did the same in his Ferrari, which caught fire. Stewart had a firm grip on the race, while Peterson had to fight for second with Beltoise until the Frenchman crashed on lap 16. At the same time, Donoghue pitted for new goggles, but did not lose a place. This left a large gap between the first 2 and the rest. Peterson took the lead on lap 18, but on lap 31 Stewart took the lead back while they were going through backmarkers. A few moments later, Peterson ran into Eaton's BRM and damaged the front of his car. This upset the balance of the car and Peterson was unable to match Stewart's pace, and so the Tyrrell edged away to win by nearly 40 seconds. It was Stewart's 6th championship victory of the season. Donoghue finished third on his F1 debut. Another fortnight later, the championship moved to the newly revamped and redesigned Watkins Glen circuit in upstate New York. The circuit, originally 2.3 miles long, had been significantly upgraded, with a new pits and paddock complex and an additional mile of new track. Jackie Stewart took his 6th pole position of the year for Tyrrell, ahead of Emerson Fittipaldi, Denny Hulme, Clay Regazzoni, Francois Sevet, Jo Siffert, Jackie Ickx and Chris Amon. 29 drivers entered and started the race. Stewart took the lead from Hulme at the start, with Sevet moving up to 3rd place, followed by Regazzoni and Siffert. Fittipaldi made a poor start and was 8th. On the 7th lap, Sevet was able to pass Hulme for 2nd place, and on lap 14 he moved ahead of Stewart, who was suffering from bad oversteer. Hulme was also having handling problems and he began to drop back, being overtaken by Ickx, who had passed Siffert. Stewart also fell victim to the Ferrari and then Siffert as well. It stalked Siffert until lap 40 when the Ferrari began to fall back with an alternator problem, which led to the Belgian's retirement. This moved Siffert to second place and Peterson, who had passed Stewart, to take third. Howden Ganley was fourth with Stewart fifth. It was Siffert's first World Championship victory, and with the Mexican Grand Prix having been cancelled due to crowd control problems the previous year, the United States Grand Prix was the last World Championship race of the 1971 season.